Welcome to the April the 7th taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we take you back into yesteryears, and we're going to welcome Mr. J.C. Swadley, Jr. as our historian of the day. And J.C., you're our tape number 13, and that's going to be lucky for us because you're so important to the history of Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate those remarks. Let me say that my folks came to Dallas in the early 1880 from West Virginia, out of the Shenandoah Valley, and my granddad located at White Rock Lake, which is in Dallas County, on the Caruth farm.
All right, now would you give us your grandfather's name and your grandmother's name, and if you know her maiden name, we'd like that.
My granddad was Jacob Newman Swadley.
All right.
And my grandmother was, she was a Crowder. I can't remember her first name. It's always grandmother.
Grandmother.
But she was a Crowder.
All right, and then she married Mr. Swadley, and they came to the Caruth farm on White Rock Lake.
That's right.
All right, and how many children did they have, J.C.?
There were 9, and my dad was the 6th of the 9. There was 4 girls and 5 boys.
All right, now your dad was the magic J.C. Swadley Sr., and what did that J and C stand for?
Jacob Cleveland.
Jacob Cleveland.
My granddad thought much of our President Cleveland and Jacob of the Bible. Of course, I carried the name as Junior. And
now give us your mother's maiden name, please.
My mother was Eddie Tishy Smith. Now her folks came from Missouri, and they settled at Ferris, Texas. And in later years, my mother and her 2 sisters came to Grand Prairie, and they worked for the Fishburns and the Collins. But my grandmother, that was 1912 when my mother came and Grand Prairie, and my dad met her and married my mother in 1912.
All right, now tell me where they met in Grand Prairie, Texas.
I think that in the remarks that I received from them, that Daddy was in a business of water wells and plumbing, and his brother, Floyd Swadley, and they've done some work for the Fishburns, and I think they met there when Mother worked there at the Fishburns place, and Fishburns was down what we call the Fishburn stop on the in urban would be Baghdad area now in the east part of Grand Prairie.
All right, the Fishburns, did they have some type of business there?
They had farmland, and they bought cotton, and they were quite big farmers in this area, one of the big farmers.
And if they lived near where the old Baghdad was, at Baghdad Road and Highway 80 now, did their land go north or south?
It was more or less, as I understood, it was the east part and some of the west part there. The Fishburn home is back of our number 2 fire station off of Baghdad and Pine, which was Fishburn Drive. But they farmed all that land just around them there. Sure did, Ruthie.
Wonderful. And your mother and your dad lived here in Grand Prairie, and you mentioned one of your father's brothers. Did he have other brothers living in Grand Prairie?
He had, no, not at that time. His other brothers, one was in California and one was in Arizona, and I don't recall where some other my uncles were, but his sisters, 2 of them were in Dallas there for a while, and one of them married Mr. Bailey, who was a Baptist minister. But
all right, now tell me this, J.C., were you an only son?
No, thank you, Ruth. My mother and Dad bought a home, or they lived in a house there on East Main, where Western Auto stores are.
Today?
That's right, today.
Right.
And my sister, Rowena Clark, and I were born there. So we were just short distance from my daddy's building that he built in 1912 there on Main Street. And later on, my dad bought the Methodist parson, which was located where the Kroger stores are now on 2nd and College Street.
Right across from the old school building, right?
That's right. It sure was, Ruth. So
all right, and that left you and Rowena, and I think you had another brother.
Carl Page, he was born there, and he was, of course, the youngest of us two or three. He was my young brother, my baby brother. Yes, he sure was.
And Carl Page died in World War II,
in
right?
World War II in the South Pacific. He was in the Air Force, and he was on the B-24, and they had made a mission on trucks, several of them. And one of their missions they didn't get to return, but he sure did. That was along about 44 whenever that came about, Ruth. Sure.
Well, back in the dark ages, Carl Page Swadley was my very first boyfriend at the First Methodist Church.
He thought a lot of Ruthie, and Carl Page was. He
was a very fine young man.
He sure was. Thank you. We were proud of him.
All right, now, I note with a great deal of interest, J.C., that you have a lot of things here about the fire department, but let's don't get into that. We've talked about your family.
Let's talk about.
But let's talk about Grace's family. Yes, your dear wife, Grace.
Yes.
Small Swadley. Tell us a little bit about Grace.
Grace's family. Her daddy was Jess Franklin Small, and he came from. I believe it's Tennessee, yes.
All right.
He came from Tennessee, and of course her mother, Lida Small, was from Fort Worth, and here in Texas, naturally. But Jess Small was a wonderful man for the community. He was our first fire chief in 1917. Mr. Small and my dad and John Stubbs on the depot platform met one evening and suggested that they asked several more of the citizens to help be a volunteer fireman. And at that time they had buckets, and they were very concerned about the community. So Grace's mother was a wonderful lady here in the community. She had the small hotel that was on Church and Center Street. It is now the parking lot of our motel there. But during WW2, Miss Small boarded the men that worked at North American, and I believe she had about 10 or so men there that boarded with her. But Mr. Small was a manager of the Texas and Pacific grocery store called A&P. He worked with the community and helping people. He was a very good man to help one another. And of course he passed away in the 50s.
All right, now you mentioned that Mr. Small was the first fire chief. Was he the fire chief before your dad was?
No, yes, he was. Mr. Small was very helpful in that, and in 1920, they, at that time, asked my dad to represent the volunteers and be their fire chief. And Daddy was mechanically minded and had a lot of ambition in that, which they all did, but they all thought, well, Uncle Jake, they called him. Now, the reason he received the name of Uncle Jake, his nephews from Floyd Swadley, his brother, they worked for Daddy in his garage building after he had built this big building, and he's known as Uncle Jake to the community. So he served as the chief there, and in our volunteer department, which is very democratic, they would every once in a while elect someone to be a chief for a year, and then they'd elect somebody else. But it seemed that they wanted Daddy to continue for a number of years, and he was chief emeritus at the end of his tour of duty for the community, and he was very helpful. He was our city commissioner of water back in 33 to 47, I believe. And pardon me for saying this, but he would use his equipment sometimes on the water mains to help them fix it. We had a wrecker that they could use to lift the heavy pipes, but Daddy was very concerned about the community. We all had our heart in it, Ruth.
Wonderful.
Great, sure was.
Well, Mr. J.C. Swadley's building now. If we were to go down Main Street about Northeast 2nd toward the Sears surplus store on the northeast corner of that piece of property, would we find underneath all that facade the first building your dad ever built?
That's right. It sure was.
Do you have a picture of that for us?
Ruth, this top picture right here is the building that he built in 1912. He had the first filling station and garage building in the community, and in later years they he added on to this building in 1921, and in doing so they stored the fire equipment in the building that he had built. Now, the reason the city asked him to handle this for them, in 1919, it was in a garage building in the west of Main Street, right across from where is the bank building now, and it's college, and their 19 and 19 truck burnt down in this building.
I see.
But in 1920, they bought another Model T Ford, and they put it in this building, and so he, from then on till 1948, housed our fire equipment.
All right, now his first building and this building are now incorporated in the building where we find Finders Keepers, a couple of antique stores, and where Ralph Clark's old auto parts used to be.
That's right. It sure is.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And I believe there's a friendly lady in our town that has bought that property.
She sure did.
Dorothy Markham Ballard.
We're glad.
Yes.
I was glad that my sister and I, that Dorothy obtained this, because she is very interested in our community. Now, this is the building after it was later added on to, and that's on the corner of 2nd and East Main.
All right, now what was on the corner of 2nd and Main there for a while? Wasn't it a grocery?
No, there was a vacant lot that belonged to the Baptist church.
Oh, it was?
And he bought that those lots from the First Baptist Church back there in 1920.
All right, what did he put on that corner?
He put in this garage and a storage and a filling station and parts house. So he had, that's where we had 5 men working for Daddy, and they kept it open at nights. Now, this was great because he was interested, I say, in the community. He hired a man to work at night because that's where you called to tell somebody that Jones's house was on fire. And they would sound the alarm, which there's this big siren on top of that building, and everybody in town could hear this call for the firemen, and he had somebody there all the time to look after that.
To take care of that is a free service to our city of Grand Prairie.
Sure was, honest
That's
to good.
wonderful. And after all of those years, we're going back to some of the old history, but what is this picture,
This
J.C.?
is our first fire station that was built by our city on West Main at 317, and that station was housing the equipment at that time, and that was back in, this picture was made in '52, and they built this station in 1948.
And this is now our number 1 fire station?
That's number 1 fire station. It sure is.
That's wonderful. J.C., what year did you become the fire chief of Grand Prairie, Texas?
1950.
1950.
I was assistant chief elected by the volunteers there for quite a while, and I was grateful for the position because I was interested too. But in 1950, Dad retired as a volunteer, and which there was this free offer for him. But from there until '61, I served as our fire chief, and they hired me in 1945 as the first paid fireman when they were in my dad's building, and there was an apartment there. And this is quite unique to me. Whenever the people would call for our firemen to come to their aid, my wife, Grace, at night would get up and downstairs where they were stored, I would drive that first fire truck out, and she would start the other trucks and have them running when the boys came in to...
When your volunteers would arrive. So she was really an assistant chief, wasn't
she? She sure was.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Very good, very good.
That's great. J.C., I happen to have a copy of a notice in the Grand Prairie Texan, as it was called, back in 1939, and it says a new fire truck is being built at the local garage. If there is anyone in Grand Prairie that is known to everyone, it is J.C. Swadley, the proprietor of the garage. He has operated for many years. Furthermore, if there is a man in western Dallas County who is renowned as a mechanical genius, that man is J.C. Swadley.
That's my dad.
This gentleman has specialized in automobile mechanism mostly, but he is considered an authority on several other line of mechanical craftsmanships.
Right.
Among the recent outstanding achievements of Mr. Swadley is the building of a new fire truck for the city. The citizens may point to it with pride as a home product.
Right.
In addition to his multiplicity of other duties, Mr. Swadley finds the time to give service to his town, as he has served as a city commissioner for a period of more than 12 years.
That's right.
Now, that's an exciting article to know that your dad was so creative, the city couldn't afford a fire truck, and he built it.
That's right. They bought the chassis and the pump, and they built the body. There's where my uncle, one of my uncles, came in and helped build the body part of this. And by the way, Tom Powers, who was a volunteer fireman, he painted this truck for him without any charge, and it was just really a community affair that they did to make us another fire truck.
J.C., I have an old photograph here that's in the paper in 1940 that has a picture of that first truck that your dad apparently built.
That's it.
Do you recognize that little bitty fire truck that's right here?
That's right, Ruth. That was a Ford truck, and they built that in his building, his shop. And my uncle helped him build that, and we used it very much. There's a coincidence. There was a house burning over at Addison. Now that's on Beltline Road going east from our location, and it was in a county, but nobody could go help them. And they called Grand Prairie, and they drove this truck over there to this house to help them. And I called that a wonderful thing for the city to feel that they could help someone in community aid. And
as far away as Addison.
As far as Addison, it sure did. It wasn't in the city, it was in the county, but it was over close to Addison. And I didn't get to go, but J.D. Stedman, who was working for the city then, was superintendent of water, and 2 or 3 more of the men took time to go over and help those people do with whatever they could. But Grand Prairie has always been a helping hand to the county around and the communities, and I'm grateful for the government to think about helping one another as well as our local people.
J.C., I'm going to have to ask you a question about the bottom of this article in 1939 has a statement that I've not been able to research at all, and I'm going to try this one on you for size. It says, the Bankhead Highway is Grand Prairie's main street. Now, this is something that the paper printed in 1939. Have you ever heard of Main Street being the Bankhead Highway?
Never did, Ruth. I don't understand that.
Do you think maybe we might have to research that?
I wish we would, and I'd be one to try to help you because I am interested in this community as well as you are.
Wonderful, and I think that if we'll go back to Mr. Sam's old map of about 1900, who knows, this may have been called, before it became the Pike.
Yes,
we remember when it was the Dallas-Fort Worth Pike.
Yes, yes.
That was something new, so we're going to have to research. All right, J.C., let's move your things around and let's get this memorabilia. Would you hold that up and talk about this picture at the top, please? Not over your face, please.
Okay, thank you. This is a picture of our entire personnel of the department with the 2 1923 model fire trucks, and our city government is also in this. Mr. Turner, Mr. Roberts, and
Mr. Roberts was the
was
superintendent.
superintendent. He sure was.
Mr. Turner was the mayor.
Mayor, and let me see if I can think of these other two gentlemen, but I can't write offhand. But I would like to say, in the background, as I have my finger, that was the First Baptist Church. In 1939, on one Monday night, that church caught a fire, and the men worked awful hard, but it was a total loss. But it was the Baptist church back there.
And even though it was that near the fire department.
Just right around from them, but it was so involved. And it was a wooden type structure. And of course it had a lot of contents in there, the varnished pews and everything, and it was pretty much.
Was that located just adjacent to your dad's building?
Right behind, right back of it. It sure was, Ruth. It really was.
And now they built the building a little to the north of that, right?
They sure did. They sure did.
So the original site of that First Baptist Church was...
The back part of that, there was one house between this church and my dad's building, and that was Brian Crouch.
Brian Crouch's home.
Crouch's, and he was in the plumbing and also electrical business. But,
and what was across the street to the west from your dad's building?
That was the Stubbs home, and then there was a blacksmith shop on the corner of 2nd and East Main there. That was the Stubbs.
Stubbs Blacksmith Shop.
That's right. It sure was.
And what year was that? Do you remember?
Probably around the blacksmith shop was in there at least 1910, 1911. Of course, I wasn't born there, but I grew up and it was still there. But Louise Irwin Stubbs, they lived right across the street there from.
And on down to the north, I know the Tinsleys lived there.
Right.
In an old home there across from the First Baptist Church for many long years.
That's right, that little house.
Right on
Ruth,
the corner.
you're an old timer also.
Yes, yeah. We're all old timers, aren't we, J.C.?
certainly are.
All right, now you have one other thing here of some old memorabilia. I'd like for you to hold this up and show these pictures and give us the date of that photograph in the Grand Prairie Daily News.
Yes, this top part is 1910. That was made from a view looking to the east downtown, and it shows the depot and it shows the platform where the cotton was loaded. Grand Prairie was really a cotton agricultural area. I know I read an article there in about 1911. They said they had 175 bales of cotton that had been ginned, and we had 3 gins here. But this was this was Grand Prairie. This was a drugstore known as a Hancock's.
And now where was that located, the Hancock Drug, on the south side of Main?
South side of Main, on the 100 block of West, on the
West Main.
Yeah, West Main, sure was.
Located approximately now where the Marie's shop is located?
That's right.
Okay.
It sure was.
All right, how about this picture over here?
This is one of our fire trucks. This was on it has a number 4. And that 4 represents that it's the 4th fire truck that the community required for protection. And this one on the bottom to my right is the inside of my dad's garage. And in that picture, my dad, my uncle, Carl Swadley, Mr. Whitzel, and this gentleman, I can't recall his name.
Show us your dad. We want you to point out your dad.
Dad is standing right there, holding this inner tube with this gentleman, this Mr. Whitzel, and this is my uncle. Now, the Whitzel is the family that lived in Dalworth, and Skeeter Delk was a Whitzel.
Skeeter Delk was a Whitzel.
And that's her dad. And this is when we had the Texas Traction Company in Urban that was from Dallas to Fort Worth, and this is one of the cars that would drive through from Dallas to Fort Worth. It was electrical in Urban.
All right, now this interurban, how far were these tracks removed from the T&P Railroad tracks where the depot was located?
They were on the south side of the railroad track where Jefferson is now. That was the bed. The Jefferson Street became Jefferson whenever they removed this it must have been 34 or 35, they removed that. During a Depression year, It was not. It wasn't making any profit, so they.
But there was a depot for the interurban and a depot for the train.
They sure was. The interurban depot was on Front Street, which is Jefferson, and Cal Spears ran this for the traction company.
Wonderful.
And you know, it's something we read about history. There was a Clyde Barrow from West Dallas that turned to be a pretty bad person, and he held up the office of this interurban where Mr. Spears worked one day, and he had just sent the receipts to Fort Worth office, and there was just a small amount that Clyde Barrow and his partner recovered from there by holding up Mr. Spears.
JC, we have a couple of more minutes left, and I know that I want you to talk about one of the most exciting fires, because you have some pictures here of the fire at Old Baghdad.
I sure do.
And we want you to tell us a little bit about the fire at the old rubber company, but let's show this about the Baghdad Club.
I sure will. This was a building at Baghdad and East Main, and right now as you drive down there will be a vacant field that has a fence around it, which is called the safety zone. But this building was a nightclub. It was built in the 20s, somewhere around 26 or 27.
It looked like the Taj Mahal.
It sure did, and
very Persian.
It was everybody admired the building.
Oh, it was beautiful.
And they had this was a place where you could go. They had a beautiful pavilion in there for dancing and everything.
And dining.
And it was really a place of interesting and pleasure, because there was nothing going wrong, no roughness or anything. And they were out of Grand Prairie city limits. They was out of Dallas city limits. But there was a group from Chicago built this. And in 1953, there was a Dr. Newton and his wife bought this property. And they had some antiques stored in this building. And one Sunday morning about 6:30, our fire department was notified that there was a fire, and the men all responded to that, but it was too far involved before they could do anything. Dallas came out and helped us. The Naval Base sent some help, and Arlington sent some help. But this was a very spectacular fire. They say that you could see the column of smoke from Waco, and that's 100 miles. But we were sorry that it happened, but it was a wonderful building. Sure
yes, it was.
Ruth.
Well, JC, we really do appreciate your being on our show and bringing these memories for us today about the fire department, about your dad.
We have a wonderful fire department now.
Yes, you do.
That's right.
Yes, we do. Also, I want to thank Grace for the wonderful research that she has helped us to do.
Thank you,
and
Ruth.
for being the assistant fire chief
That's
back in the beginning,
she sure
and
did.
all of the good things. And thank her for Ain't Lida Small, her mother
will.
that was wonderful to all of us going through school.
That's
when she
right.
worked in the lunchroom.
That's right.
Ran the lunchroom at the Grand Prairie ISD, and I worked for her
You
for
sure?
a while.
Bless you.
Well,
You sure
JC,
did. Thank
it was
you,
a
darling.
pleasure having you on our show.
Thank you, Ruth.
And remember that history is as we live and